Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Pertman. I know a lot of you, not all of you. I am the president and founder of NCAP. I'm delighted that you're all here. I invite those of you who don't know us to please take a look at our website, ncap-us.org. We tossed the US in because we couldn't get the URL with just NCAP. And you'll see, I hope, lots of things that are useful, informative, advocacy related, that describe the work we do. One thing I'll call out, we have not made it very public yet, is we have something called our Legacy Series. And these are interviews with people who have been doing child welfare work for a long time. Most of them are NCAP team members. A growing number are not. And the number of these legacy interviews, which are designed to inform the field, be interesting to people, entertain. I'm sure most people would rather watch some of these interviews than anything that is on television. No, just kidding. And we are setting up, excuse me, a YouTube channel with those and with other materials. But take a look at the website. We think and hope you'll be interested in both just learning from it and maybe even in working with us, if that's appropriate to whatever role you play. So with that, I don't want to chat much. I want to hand the baton over to my very, very wonderful friend and colleague, Hollee McGinnis. I have known Hollee for a very long time. She was, some of you know that I headed the Donaldson Adoption Institute for years. And guess who my first hire was? Ta-da! And we have come a long way. Hollee is a scholar, a professor, an adopted human who has enormous passion for the subject matter. And she has been an advocate, an educator, and now, to cut to the chase, she is concocted a project that is genuinely, I think, unprecedented in its breadth and its depth, to look at the lives and experiences of adopted people throughout their lifespan. The one little asterisk in the unprecedented is the genesis of this was a project that Hollee led at the Donaldson Adoption Institute that we called Beyond Culture Camp. And it was the first look at a whole gamut of issues relating to adopted people. But it focused primarily, overwhelmingly, on internationally adopted transracial adoptees. This study that Hollee is leading is an outgrowth of that, but a huge expansion to include adopted people who were adopted from foster care as infants domestically, from other countries, so the gamut. And I think, what we can learn from this work is enormous and important. NCAP is proud to have Hollee now as our latest senior research fellow, and we will be working with her to aid and abet this project in every way that we can. And when it's done, we'll publish about it, etc. But that's enough. So with that, thank you all for attending, and I will hand the mic over to Hollee.
Great. Thanks so much for that warm welcome, Adam. And it feels really great to be working with you and NCAP and all of the affiliate groups and who know your work as well as NCAP's work and our prior work at the Donaldson Adoption Institute. So another great big hello to everyone. And I'm going to just jump in and explain this project. So I'm going to share my screen. And can everyone see the full screen there? Okay. Adam, can you just give me a heads up that you can see the screen?
Yep, you got
it. Great. So this project is, I named it Mapping the Life Course of Adoption Project, Health, Wellbeing, and Adoptee Connections in Adulthood. And so I'm going to just talk about some of the logic as to how I got, how we came upon this project specifically, and then provide some of the information about the project itself. So it got started because right around the time of the pandemic, spring of 2020, I was writing a grant for an internal grant at VCU, and I knew that I wanted to study adult adoptees, and I can only find adult adoptees in groups, so I would study both of them. And it's evolved since then to include other adoptee research partners. And what really launched this project and really gave it its full form was when I began to really work with adoptee groups. And since most of my connections in the adoption community is with Korean adoptee organizations, many of them have been instrumental now in this particular funding. But very grateful for Virginia Commonwealth University for the funding so that I can actually compensate adoptees who participate and complete this project. So some background and rationale for the study. So I am an adopted adult from South Korea. I was adopted when I was 3.5. And so that's where my life and these questions really began. So I was raised as Hollee McGinnis in a nice Irish Catholic family in Westchester County, about an hour north of New York City. But my life started in South Korea. And in college was really what I began to think, not about my adoption, but more around my racial ethnic identity. How did I fit in an American society with this Irish last name, blonde hair mom, and a Korean face? And that led a lot to foundational thinking about my American race relations, but also research on the history of international adoptions. And that really laid the foundation for a group that I started back in 1996 in New York City called Also Known As. And the name of the organization was really thinking through my own conflict and identity, feeling that I had to choose one identity over the other, that I had to choose to fit myself into a white Irish Catholic body or this Korean body that I actually existed in. And the truth was I was both of them. And so the name of the group was really a way to bridge and acknowledge that for many transracial and international adoptees, we hold two identities and maybe more. And so I like to introduce myself as Hollee McGinnis, but also known as Ihwa Young. Starting that group really launched me into my career in adoption and connecting with so many other people who had lived experiences of adoption and professionally as well. And I benefited so much from these connections to adoptees because I was of the generation where culture camps and parent-led groups were only just beginning to emerge. And my mom actually even said to me that she knew of some adoptive parent groups, but she thought that they were only for families who were having problems. So she didn't see the value of being connected to a community, but I certainly experienced that. Also known as back in 1996, there was a kind of a burgeoning of Korean adoptee groups. And the first group started actually in Europe. But in the US, in the 1990s, several groups started to be formed. And when I finished my master's of social work, my final year, I wrote about this growing community of adult Korean adoptees and really seeing adults as a resource for adoption practice. Adoptee groups in Korea, Korean adoptee groups also began to formulate in South Korea. Some of these groups' goal is still around, some of the other ones have changed, but I think the international Korean adoptees have been unique in establishing kind of home institutions back in their countries of origin. So this is just a little bit of background about adoptee groups, at least in the international adoption realm. There's been some research also on adoptee groups, specifically on Korean adoptee groups, but they're really focused on kind of that 1990s, 2000s period, and there hasn't been much research on adoptee groups right now, contemporarily. And I just want to acknowledge that in especially domestic adoption. Adoptees have been organizing way before the Korean adoptees. So back in the 1970s, several major organizations started. I always think of B.J. Lifton as being one of the real leaders in elevating adoptee voices. There have been motherland tours that were informed by or led by adoptees at different agencies. So it wasn't that 1990s was just the arrival of all of these Korean or Asian adoptee groups. Adoptees have been organizing for a long time. Also on the internet, these are some of the prominent adoptee leaders there. And so another key piece that informed why I wanted to focus on adoptees' connections with other adoptees and adoptee groups was because of the work that I had done at the Donaldson Adoption Institute, specifically the Beyond Culture Camp study. And in that study, we had asked a really simple question to the adoptees. Looking back on your life, how important was your adoptive identity and how important was your racial ethnic identity? And so this just shows how important one's adopted identity was. And what was so curious to me was how for the Korean transracial adoptees and the white same-race adoptees in the 2009 study, we found by middle school, half of the adoptees began to say that their identity as an adopted person became important to them. But what's so intriguing is that it kept going up. So by young adulthood, which was quite a wide span, up to 80% of adoptees were saying that their adoptive identity continued to be important to them. And so what I'm really excited about is that in the Mapping the Life Course of Adoption, I'm asking the same question again, and I'm hoping that we'll have more adoptees in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, because I really want to know about them. Because again, these later data points were just a few people, only 1 or 10. But clearly it spoke to me that there's something about our identities as adopted people that's not getting resolved. And that it becomes important to us later on in our lives. And I remember sitting with Adam and Susan trying to make sense of some of that. We also asked in the 2009 study, what were things that were helpful that adoptees identify for their identities? And this was the first data point that began to help me say, beyond my own experience of being in adoptee-led spaces, other people also identify events by adult adoptee organizations or support group for adoptees as being helpful. So again, a little bit more for the Korean adoptees, but still 50% for white same-race adoptees. And then I highlight some of these items in yellow, because at least in the Korean adoptee groups and organizations, many of these things are happening: exposure to multicultural entertainment, opportunities to learn about their birth culture, and that sort of thing. So knowing that that adoptee groups could be having a positive impact on identity, I started my job at Virginia Commonwealth University, and I said, well, what do we know about outcomes later on in life? And I know, so I did a literature research, a gap map, and what Dr. Amanda Baden and Frina and O'Leary Wiley and I did was we said, let's look at the literature and see if there is any literature on these outcomes that we would expect there would be some research on. And then we looked. And so what you see in this gap map is the circles are where there is some literature, and where there's nothing in the cells, there's just no literature, no research. And so we were interested also in, have there been any interventions designed for adoptees later on in their life? And as you see, for all types of intervention, nothing has been designed specifically for adoptees. We do know that there are some interventions for adoptees more attachment-based when they're young, but there really is nothing designed specifically for adoptees later on in life. What we also find is that studies have a lot of gaps. So surprisingly, very few studies have looked at trauma specifically. There's nothing in that column. Very little Research has looked at grief and loss in adulthood, deportation, that's a big thing in the international community, how advocacy work might happen. There is some research on adoption identity, a little bit on birth parent search, and some on adoptive parent relationships. But as you see, there's a lot of gaps. So that was further verification that we needed to understand more about how adoption looks later on in life. In January of 2020, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that was another huge hit that shifted the direction of this study. And I would say in the same 10-year window, about half of my close Korean adoptee friends were also diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I had to really think hard. If anyone is a cancer survivor, you do a lot of soul searching. And I had done so much research in my PhD around adverse childhood experiences. And I said, well, if we know that ACEs matters in studies of, of populations of mostly white upper middle class folk, what do we know about ACEs and adoptees' risks for physical health problems later on in our life? And so that became another core interest of this study, is to understand whether adopted people are at greater risk for physical health ailments than the general population. Because again, that research has not been done. So I am curious about how community and connections, especially with other adoptees, is important for adults. And I think of the kind of organic way that the Korean adoptee groups at least got established, and I think of them as an informal intervention. So I want to understand more about how participating in them might be helpful or not. And I think one of the key things about community that you can't get in other spaces, even one-on-one therapy, is power and change. And so those are just some ideas for you to sit with. So mapping the life course of adoption project. So it's a project, meaning that it goes far beyond the survey. And so if you're familiar with Bronfenbrenner, nested, there's like individual, then there's the micro, the family, the meso, the relationship between family and schools or organizations, and then there's the macro. And so at the individual level, I have a survey, but at the meso level, one of the aims of the mapping of the MAP project is to really create a new paradigm for generating knowledge about adoption, in which it is co-created with adoptees and for them. And this is largely because of the rise of adoptee scholars who are entering in as PhDs and other researchers in adoption, but also my own personal experience as adoptee, where I've been asked to complete surveys and then I never find out what happened, what that knowledge and information is. And so I was very much trained in a positivist, post-positivist research paradigm. And essentially that research paradigm is researcher scholar is the expert, dives into the community with their research questions, extracts that data and knowledge from the community, goes back into their lab or office, writes up all of the findings, and publishes it in an academic journal that nobody else has access to. And I was really clear as I was doing my own soul searching during the pandemic that that is not the kind of research that I want to do when and if I'm ever working with an adoptee. And I was reflecting just how much I had also personally benefited from all of the theoretical paradigms on human development, identity, by able to have access to getting a master's and a PhD. And I said, adoptees are smart. I want to lower that bar and I want them to have the knowledge. And so on the one level, this project is really about figuring out how to do that in community. And then really beginning the survey being a beginning step to mapping out what adoption looks like later on in our lives and the impact of adoption on adoptees' physical, mental health, and identity and general well-being, as well as how participating in adoptee groups or spaces might impact and set people up for a more thriving adulthood. So, there is, again, in the positivist, post-positive frame of adoption, of research and scholarship, there's this false notion that research is done without any bias. And I come from more of a constructivist, critical paradigm in which everything is biased. So you have to name it first. So I do have some intentions in setting up the project that I imagine and that I'm hoping the impact will have. So first and foremost, I'm hoping that as we begin to map what adoption looks like later on in life, we can begin to go and change practices and policies so children will have what they need to be a thriving adult at the age of 60. Now, the thing is that we don't know what adoptees need at 60 and 70, but this survey will begin to understand that. And then we can go back and change those practices so that that child at 15 will have what they need at 60, 70. I also am really hoping to bring some data to show how adoptee-led groups are helpful or not helpful. And if they are helpful, then how they can receive more resources to actually do the stuff that they do largely voluntarily. And again, the third implication is really developing this community participatory research paradigm for doing research with adoptees. That's essentially grounded in research being done with us, not to us. So for those who are research oriented, this is for the survey piece, why the survey is so long. So I've had people say, Hollee, why didn't you split the survey, asking just questions about adoptee groups and spaces and just asking about kind of mental health and physical health? It's because I wanted to know the relationship between the two of them. And so at the individual level, I'm interested in especially cumulative stress factors. So I ask about adverse childhood ACEs, as well as lifetime trauma and current adult stressful events. And then that layering on top of stressors because of race, adoption, and birth parent loss. And then also considering some of those protective factors as well. And if they have, relationships to specific outcomes around general mental health symptoms, including PTSD or complex trauma, physical health, and issues of identity. And again, what I found so striking, and I'm excited about this, is that in much of the adoption literature, we assume that adoptees have experienced adverse childhood experiences, but usually we presume that it all happened before placement. And so we don't know, we don't measure it. So to have an ACEs score and for adopted adults, again, they might not know either their ACEs before their adoption, but if anything happened, post-placement, we'll finally actually have a measurement of that rather than just assuming that things have happened. And I'm also really excited to get some sense of our just general physical health. So as I said, this is a survey that can take people 60 to 90 minutes to complete. At the very minimum, it's taken people 30 minutes, but it's a long survey. And that's why there is a e-gift compensation of $20 for completing the survey. But this is just to give you a full sense of many of them are standardized survey measures, and except for the participating in adoptee groups and spaces. One of the reasons that was not standardized is that nobody's really studied it. And that also I found how I was conceptualizing adoptee groups as mutual aid groups. I realized there's not enough literature to understand even what is happening in adoptee groups. So it's very descriptive, like what do you do? What drew you there? So that we begin to even just understand the nature of the groups and then see if they kind of fit within theoretical models of mutual aid. So the survey has been up since February, and this is the public link right here to the survey. And if you go to careresearch.org/map, that's the link that you'll have. However, the internet has gotten really savvy, and I was already warned about putting all these protections on the online on an online survey so that robots wouldn't get it. Well, robots have gotten to it. And so that means that I've had thousands of robots taking the survey, and they're not real people. Or I've had people who are not adoptees who got a hold of the link. They're only interested in the $20. So it's a real person, but it's not real data. And so now me and my GRA are sifting through like 5,000 surveys to figure out who's real. So I'm only giving this private link to select groups, and I'm providing it to you all. I ask just so that we know that you are a real adoptee and I can compensate you faster. That's why I'm providing you all with this private link. I would ask, do not give this out on any of your social media. If you do social media, do the public link, because it's already a mess and we're gonna have to sift through it. But if you know an adoptee, email them this private link and tell them, do not share that anywhere out of your social media or anything like that. Because then I know that you're a real person and I can compensate you, and it just will help us a little bit. I'm really excited for the next stages. So I'm planning on closing down the public's link on April the 30th. The private link I'll keep up a little bit longer, probably through May the 6th. So you'll have a little bit more time. But I'm really excited now about how to, again, part of the shifting of the research paradigm is you work with the community to make sense of the findings. So data is the data, but in every research paper, there's a discussion section, which really is where the researcher is trying to make sense of the data. And so I'm really excited with trying to think about how we can do this in community. So I already have, working with some of the adoptee partners, 3 community webinars that I'm planning in the fall, in which we'll take one of the topics. So we have so many topics, right? It could be adoptive identity, it could be social support, it could be trauma history. And I will present some of that data. And then we will sit and we will think about, what does that all mean? And I'm still figuring out how that actually will look and how that will get incorporated. But I'm just really, really excited to think about inviting adoptees in to look at the data with me and make sense of that, and then have this data, which is really just the beginning. There's so much more that we need to know about adoption later on in life, that new projects and opportunities might percolate out of that. So that's the project. Again, I'll be presenting some of the findings at the Intercountry Korean Adoptee Association gathering this summer. I'll be presenting some webinars with some funding that Boston Korean adoptees have gotten, but those will likely be open to everyone. Next June, I'll be presenting some findings at the CON conference. And then next summer, there's the International Conference on Adoption Research, which is brings international adoption scholars from around the world together. So those are some opportunities. And I really look forward to thinking with you all ways that we could disseminate through your local spaces. And I can't tell you how important I think the local work that you do, because adoptees will trust you. Families trust you. And so having been involved in adoptee organizing for 27 years now, I've seen at least the international adoptee community evolve. And what I'm really excited is, in the very early days when I started, also known as, it was really about an aha moment that there was even a community, and we were so thankful to be connected. We didn't want anything to happen to shatter the community. Well, as the community evolved, people got political, and groups broke up and that kind of stuff. But I feel like we're at a third stage, and what I'm really hoping is that in this kind of third stage, there's all these different groups and organizations that we can begin to coordinate through them. And I think information is a very nice way to work together, because I think we're so much stronger together. That's all I have to share.
Hollee, I'm going to jump in for a second and just point out a couple of things. Um, First, just an easy one. I think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer it. Whether the question was whether this is open to adopted people in Canada as well. I think
Ah,
the
got
answer
it.
is
Yeah.
no. Is
Yeah,
that
so
correct?
no. So that's the one limiter. They have to be US based. So 18 and older, but any type of adoption, so international, domestic, or from foster care adoptions. And again, I'm not verifying if you're adopted or not. I just can't. But it is limited to US adoptees. And hopefully we can modify the survey at some point and expand out.
Holly, would you put the link to the private link into the chat?
Yes.
I think that someone requested that makes lots of sense. Do you want your PowerPoint to be available to everyone
Yeah,
or
I can do that too.
so
Mhm,
if you would provide that to me and Graham, we
mhm.
can send it out to everyone who attended and everyone who signed up actually. And we can post it on our site as well. Um,
Great.
and I think in the same email, we can send out the private link. If you would provide me with a paragraph that is says, don't share this
You
publicly,
absolutely cannot. I
uh,
know.
to to make as strongly as we can word it to
Yeah,
try to ensure that. But we can certainly provide it widely to this group. We're doing it anyway.
yeah.
And again, just with the please caveat of not causing Holly more bot problems
Yeah,
by
yes,
by sharing it
yes,
publicly, but privately to people who might want to participate. That certainly works.
yes.
Um,
So if you're an organization and you want to share it out to membership, do the public one. If you're an organization and you know specific adoptees who might take it, do the private one. Because
right. And
anything
as
that's
part,
go ahead,
no, go
Adam.
on.
Just because already those who've taken the public, who've done the main survey, we're so behind in doing compensation because we're just trying to figure out who's real. So just let people know that as well. I
That's
think Ellen has
crazy.
a question.
Before we do just one last thing, please keep an eye on the NCAP website as part of I don't know if it's not a formal partnership, but Holly's one of our senior fellows. So as part of our work with Holly on this project, we will keep posting on the website as she goes through the phases of this, if there are notifications, if there are announcements, if there are entreaties for participation, whatever, we will you can keep an eye on the NCAP website and we will try to keep that up to date.
Yeah.
And Ellen, it's great to see you.
Adam, participants are now unmuted if they wish to contribute.
Great.
Okay.
And how do they get to show us their faces?
They can turn on the video.
Oh, they can turn on their own video. Okay, great. So let's see your faces. And Ellen, it's great to see yours. You had a question?
I have a question and a comment. And first of all, I just want to salute you, Holly, in initiating this project. I know you have some other adoptees who are researchers who are collaborating with you, and I think this is really amazing. And it's going to be such an important contribution to the adoptee community, to the adoption professional community, to the broader community that supports adoption and is touched by adoption, of which I'm a member. I want to be sure to disclose I'm not an adoptee. I have an adopted niece and brother is an adoptive parent. I'm the granddaughter of an informal adoptee, and I'm an adoption researcher. So first of all, I wanted to just salute that process and Adam and to you and your colleagues at NCAP for the work you're doing to collaborate and support this project that Holly's leading is really important. Thank you so much. My question and suggestion has to do with how you are thinking about engaging adoptees who have different racial and ethnic identities in making sense of the data. And in relation to that, any thoughts about trying to target recruitment of adoptees of certain ethnic and racial backgrounds so that you can make sure that you have sufficient numbers of those groups represented both in the data and in collaborating with you and making sense of the data?
Yeah, great question. So I was gonna you'll appreciate this. I have a little data to show. Let me see if I can find it first, and then I'll address that question. Here we go. Yeah, so because there we go. So one strategy that I have had was to partner and do more of these info sessions to different adoptee-led groups. So I haven't been hugely successful because I'm actually not really great at all of the internet stuff and the social media stuff and all that kind of thing. But I was so excited because, again, folks have been asking, well, what's the sample size? What's the sample size? And I said, you know, I wanted a sample size of 800 people. And so what I was explaining to the community was that you know, I can have a sample size that is strong enough to be able to have confidence that the statistics has something to say, right? And so you know this all, Ellen, right? And so what I've been doing with the community partners, and I've been having regular meetings with them, is showing them how many people we have in the different cells. So let me see if I can find the thing. So for example, right now, well, of the 337 that we know are clean, and we know that there's more, we have about 100 of like foster adopt, international adoptees, a little more international adoptees, and then domestic adoptees. But if you go any more further down in granularity, it's not big enough. And so I use that in some of my my tea talks or whatever to say, if you want to be counted, I need at least 150 of you. So last Wednesday, also known as sponsored a tea time with a Guatemalan and Latin American adoptee group and organization. And I think showing adoptees like here's the cells, you know, this is how many we have, and we need at least 150 if you want me to say anything specific about your group. So I'll share that what we have right now with you all if it's of interest, and if not, we can move on.
Hey, Hollee, I just want to say that this is an area, excuse me, NCAP is partnered with a organization called Unbelievably Resilient, and as well as others, and we're not special. There are other organizations that have partnerships, but we will work very hard to try to grow those cohorts with and for you.
Yeah. So again, it's taken so much for us to clean out. So we know 337 cases right now. There's more, but out of that 337, so 110 were international, 128 domestic, 91 foster. So again, as a group, we could say something statistically, nothing with much reliability within. So then in the international adoptees, we have 16 Chinese adoptees, 81 Korean. So again, would love to be able to say something more specific to that, but we won't be able to, at least not statistically, until there's more. So, you know, 337 isn't bad as a group, but I think for more for more granularity, I won't be able to say too much.
Hollee,
So
ballpark,
how long are you gonna
how long are you gonna leave this open? You know, how intensive should this be, this effort to get people on board be?
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, it really depends. So one of it is I'm going to run out of money to compensate people. So that was part of why I was like, okay, April 30th, we're going to close the public one. The private link, and if I know that they're reliable people, and if they're okay that they might not get compensated, they can take the survey. But it's
for
just
how
that,
long? The next 6 months, the next
no.
you know?
I still think I need to wrap it up by mid-May.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
But because I want to be able to start to just analyze. And again, hopefully, if anybody else wants to take this survey and do it again in another format, like I think there's opportunities for it to grow. It's just a beginning.
So I would ask everybody on this call, and we'll do more outreach as well.
Yeah.
to take that to heart and know there's, roughly a month left for anybody
Mhm.
to
I
do
think the
this
deadline is actually good because I've had many people like, oh, I want to take it in February and they haven't yet.
eventually. Right. So let's really, accelerate on whatever the cliche is about hitting the gas. Let's really try to, everybody who can, is part of organizations where you can help. Let's please really work hard to increase those numbers.
Yeah. And Adam, it was so great to connect with you because you are so connected. You are a hub. And so when NCAP was like, yes, I'm going to help, I'm like, oh, thank God, because my network is much smaller. So it really, and this is like the exciting part is like, we all know each other, but everyone's positioned in those networks, right? Vary. So I'm so excited if we can get like more, and I'm so excited for the foster to adopt. Oh my God, like in adulthood. And I hope we get some of the older folks too. So thanks.
Thank you, Holly. Just one quick comment. However, I can be of support in an adjacent manner, please look to me. And specifically, I'd love to have a sidebar with you.
Yes.
Perhaps sometime in the next several days to week.
That would be great. Yeah, especially Ellen, we're sitting on so much data. And so I'm pulling Amanda and Jayron and everybody back together because I'm like, there's too much for all of us. And I want the data to be analyzed. You know how it is.
Yeah, Holly, that raises a question. There are other researchers on this call, and obviously not on this call. Do you want more of an assist, or are you all set?
Yeah. So this is the thing is like, it's hard to invite people on something that's emerging. So I invite you in and I'm figuring it out and we could figure it out together. I established my lab as the collaborative on adoption and alternative care research specifically because I want to also bring collaboration to adoption scholarship. Again, wanting mostly to elevate or support adoptees who are doing scholarship, but I am open. And again, I'm more keen on getting the data analyzed and out into the world. I am going up for tenure. I'll be submitting my package this summer. So hopefully once I get tenure, I don't have to worry about that. I can do much more like sharing. But a lot of the publications from this study are not going to be part of that tenure package.
Of course.
Anyway,
Yeah,
so.
I get it. Okay.
Deborah, sorry, Holly, Deborah Siegel's asking a question, whether there's going to be a comparison group of non-adopted people at each age group.
No. So my primary interest is actually not comparing adoptees to non-adoptees. My main or type of adoption to other type of adoption. My main interest is actually on those who identify as being part of an adoptee group and those who don't. And so that's really hard since most of my recruitment is through adoptee groups. But I think what's intriguing is, and you might like to see some of this data too, is so I asked even when I asked adoptee groups what's a member, they don't have paid membership or whatever. So I'm getting at like connection to other adoptees in 3 different questions. One is, to what extent do you identify as a member of the adoptee community? To what extent were you involved in adoptee groups in the past or currently? And what's interesting is that each of those questions, and it's a Likert scale for each 3, to like not at all to extremely, they are correlating just at a bivariate level to things differently. So I think that's really intriguing. I want to get to Tim's question, but I'll show you some of that data too.
Holly, hey, great to see you. Great to see everybody here. I continue to be extremely glad, Holly, that you're taking this project on. I'm very excited as well for you teaming up with Adam and NCAP. Thank you for everything, Adam, and everybody that's doing this. One of my favorite old statistics from the Donald Adoption Institute was that 60% of Americans are touched by adoption. So one of my favorite statistics to add to that today was your point, and maybe I'm just late coming to this, that by the time we're in middle school, over half of adoptees find it important about their identity. So it doesn't just demonstrate that this research is going to be important to people outside to adoptees, but it should demonstrate to those of us outside of the community how important it will be for them to take this very, very seriously as we move forward towards the other big point that I wanted to compliment you on about changing practices and policies so adoptees will have all that is needed by the age of, say, 60 or so. And hopefully we go a long way towards that before age 60. But that is a great goal. I can't applaud that enough. And it kind of leads to my question about this, because I know, Hollee, and you and I have had some discussions about that and shared some opinions and thoughts I've had as well about how we can make certain changes. So I'm looking forward to how we might be able to buttress that. But here's my question. In your mind, and this may be thinking way out, in terms of giving all the adoptees everything they need by the time they're 60 or getting us our needs met, are you thinking that the research might present that information in a way that touches upon different contexts, in sections perhaps, that might help us to take tidbits of it in different areas of our advocacy? We advocate in so many different ways for the adoptee community. I'm not even sure if you have a thought now about what those contexts might be. I know it's a complicated, it's a involved questionnaire. But I don't know if you're going to let the research take you to what those might be. Do you have some of those in mind? I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that you could share with us.
Yeah,
And
I already have
again,
some ideas. And again, this is where, I work with a certain set of adoptee groups and organizations. And, as the data comes out, it's open. We're resetting, we're reimagining, right? And so one big goal. So again, recognizing that research knowledge is a tool of power. And so if you can put a data point to something, then it's real. And so I really wanted to put a data point to how being connected to other adoptees in a group or organization or space or whatever, and there's so many permutations of that, how that relates to anything else, because we don't have that data. We have a lot of anecdotal things, we have my personal experience, but we don't have a data point. And so I really wanted to get that data point with the idea that then maybe we could go to funders, we could go and get more research, we can get whatever. When we say, people who participate in adoptee groups and spaces have higher critical consciousness and lower adult stress. Like that will begin to say something. And so when I was talking to the adoptee groups too, another big part that informed the questions, because again, I worked with them to formulate the questions, to test the questions. They took the surveys, like piloted 2-3 times for me. Was that they wanted to know what people were doing in other adoptee groups, so that so we are imagining we're going to create a manual. So if you're an adoptee and you want us to connect to other adoptees, we're going to have, like that could be a stage 2 or a stage 3. So these are some of the things, Tim, I'm really excited with, like, as we begin to map out adoption, what if we developed a whole, like, I want to develop a course, which I laugh because it's the life course. So a course for adoptees to take where they can explore these different aspects. Here I am, the professor, right? But I'm like, so I'm imagining an online class or something like that, where adoptees can just have access to this stuff. If these are the parts that are really relevant, that like we're really struggling with our complex trauma. And not to say that that they would take over a therapist. But I think, again, thinking in the public health triage things, there is more things that we could do. And what I see is that these adoptee groups are kind of the non-professionals who are having first interactions with some adoptees at a level 1, and then as they're having more challenges, you go to a tier 2, a tier 3. So a third goal that I would love to do is, how do we train up adoptees who are leading these spaces? Because there's never enough therapists. So how can we train up more? And this is goes back to some of the stuff that Case does. So that they can have some of these paradigms and knowledge, so they're not just going in just with their personal experience. So I'm really excited about the potentiality. And those are some of the things that I've been thinking about.
Hollee,
Really
there's
cool,
just
Hollee.
one question left, and then I'm going to, mindful of the clock, I'm going to start wrapping it up with apologies. If people have more questions, you okay with them sending an email to you or me, and we'll make sure you get them? Great. Okay. So, but the one that's left is also from Deborah. Does adoptee group include large informal friendship networks of peers who are adopted, with lots of social gatherings and connections among them? Does group mean a specific adoptee support group with an identifiable name?
Yes, so great. And I wrangled with what the heck a group is. That's why I say adoptee groups and spaces. Because when I started the study, I was thinking of the group, like also known as that I started. It was a nonprofit. We met in person. It has a board, it has, funding is all volunteer. But then with the pandemic, I found all of the groups that I thought of as groups as these like nonprofit groups were all going online. And then I said, well, so is it a group? Is it a space? And then when I talked to the groups, they didn't really know what being part of a group of their groups were either, because sometimes they had people come once, sometimes they had people come a lot, nobody paid. So that is actually one part that I'm trying to figure out. And so I have a lot of descriptive questions. What was great about the focus group that I did was I began to see that people who became leaders of the groups did identify having a close friend growing up as a child that made it more comfortable for them to enter into a group when they were older, a group or like a collection of people. And these were largely talking about these formal, I'll call them formal groups of organizations that are 501c3s and they have established boards and stuff. So I do have questions like, were you ever connected to another adoptee as a child? Was that a sibling, a friend, or whatever? So I do capture a little bit of that. And then I actually have folks who might say, I don't really strongly identify as part of the adoptee community, answering the questions, how they think that participating in such connections and spaces. So Deborah, this is part of why I pulled back from thinking that I was testing some mutual aid model, because again, we just simply don't really know what an adoptee group or spaces are. So I think it's intriguing. Again, the correlation data is showing that a person who identifies as part of the adoptee community is correlating with some different outcomes than those who just said that they participated in the past or are participating currently. So there's something, and it makes sense, right? Participation doesn't mean that you're identifying with, and it might be that identifying with that's the most protective.
Hollee, the one thought that I have in this regard is that I think it would be useful, I haven't obviously thought this through, but if it was adoptee group or organization, group, or space, because organizations people get, that's that's, so, and then you're deliberately drawing a distinction that sort of gets to Deborah's question, because I'm part of a group, I'm not part of I think that language might be useful to think about going
Absolutely.
forward.
I mean, there are going to be so many ways to improve on this, and this is just a beginning.
Well, I'm really, really honored and excited to be part of this in whatever way I can help. Delighted. So we're right on time. I think we can take a real quick question if there is one left. Otherwise, I'll give you 30 seconds of your time back. I think it looks like we're good. So thank you all so much for attending. We will post and send the PowerPoint and the private link with the caution of sharing of it. And keep an eye on the website. We'll keep everyone posted as well as we can. Obviously, Hollee will have her own website as well. And if anybody has ideas of how else we can participate or get the word out, or you have even comments about this webinar, we would love to hear it. This is part of a series that NCAP is holding. This is, I think, the third in the series, and we're going to keep going. And we invite you all to keep tabs on it and join us again.